This video will serve as an introduction to Integrify for administrators who will be building forms and workflows in Integrify. To begin creating a new form, under the Administration menu, click on Forms. And to create a new form, you'll click on Add Form and New. You will then have to name the form. For this example, I will name this one PTO Request, and then you will have to give it a category to store your form. In Integrify, categories are like folders. So you'll be able to create different categories under this Categories menu under the Administration option. So I'm going to select categories that I already created, and then you're able to give your form an optional description and click Save. Next, Integrify will take you to the Form Builder screen. In the Form Builder, you're able to drag and drop different questions and layout types. In a form, you can have sections and containers. Sections are what house the containers, and the containers are what hold the different questions. In each element of a form, there's a pencil icon for editing, a copy button to duplicate the field, and an X button to delete. Under the pencil icon of this section, I will name it PTO Request and click Save Changes. Then I'll edit the container by clicking the pencil icon and changing the number of columns to 2 instead of 1. And also clicking Save Changes, you can now see that there is a dividing middle line to show that the container now has 2 columns. Next, I'm going to drag in 2 short text fields, and I'm going to name them First Name and Last Name. And under the pencil icon of these fields, under the Validation tab, I'm going to make these fields required and click Save Changes. The next field I'll add is a select list, which is going to be a drop-down list of values. I'm going to name this one Department. And under the pencil icon, under the Multi-Choice Options tab, I'm going to add these different departments. So here I'm going to add HR, Marketing, Sales, IT, and Customer Service. And you can see every time I wanted to add a new option, I would just click this Add Option button and another field would generate. If I wanted to delete a field, I could click this X, and I can also change the order of these by dragging and dropping like this. In this Multi-Choice Options tab, you will see that each multi-choice option has a label and a value. So any list, select list, radio buttons, anything like that, they must have a label and value pair. So the label is what is displayed for the end user, and the value is what is stored in the database. Typically, the label and value are the same, but there are some cases where it would be different. There are a couple options to adding the value to your label. So if you hit the tab button, you'll see that it copies the label to the value. And also when you close the window, so if you click Save Changes and close the window, if I go back in there, you'll see that it automatically just copied the labels to each value. So overall, each selection must have a label and a value, and typically these are the same. And if no value is entered, by default, when you close the dialog box, the value will populate with whatever is in the label field. Now I will make sure under the Validation tab that this field is required and click Save Changes. Now I'm going to add some radio buttons to add the type of PTO request. So I'm going to drag the radio buttons in, and I'm going to name this Type of PTO. And under the pencil icon, under the Multi-Choice Options tab, I'm going to add Vacation, Sick, Bereavement, Jury Duty, and Other. I will also make sure under the Validation that this is required and Save Changes. Now you can see all the radio buttons have been added. I will also add in another short text field that says, if other, please explain. The next fields I'm going to add are calendar questions for start and end date. I will will also make sure to make these fields required. The final field I will add is a long text field for any comments or additional information. So right now I can kind of see that the form doesn't look very even, so I'm going to reorganize where these fields are. So right now I'm going to have first and last name, the type of PTO, and I'm going to put if other please explain underneath it. I want to have start and end date be next to each other. So under this layout section here, there's an option to have a blank space. I'm going to drag in the blank space just so I can have these start and end date options be next to each other. Now we can shift into preview mode to see how the form looks. Under the preview tab, you can see now how the form is laid out. So you can see how that blank space pushed the end date down. So now these fields are next to each other. If I wanted to add another section or container so I can divide these questions up a little bit nicer, you could do that. You can also test the validation by clicking submit, and you can see the required fields would need to be filled out in order to submit. So this is a good way to test the validation. You can add form rules under the rules tab. I will create a simple rule so that if the user selects the PTO option as other, that short text field that I added that says if other please explain will be displayed, and if they don't select other, that field will disappear. So I'll show you how to do that under add rule. I'm going to give it a name, so I'll do PTO type other. First I'll select add condition, and from the first dropdown I'm going to choose type of PTO since that's the question I want to reference. And then the next dropdown I'm going to choose equals, and then I'm going to choose other for the option in the question. So this condition is saying if the type of PTO request is other. Now I'm going to click add effect. And so the question, if other please explain, I'm going to show. So right now what this rule is saying is if the type of PTO request is other, the question, if other please explain, will show. I'm also going to select create inverse rule up at the top. In this case, if the user selects any other PTO type besides other, so if they select sick, vacation, any of those, the inverse will happen. So this if other please explain will hide instead of show. So by selecting the create inverse, it's going to just do the opposite. So now I'm going to click save rule, and you'll see that the rule has been saved. And if I click the back button, I can see that the PTO type other and the PTO type other inverse has been created. I can jump back into the preview tab to make sure that if I select other, that question will pop up. And if I select any other option, it is not. JavaScript is also available to control the form's behavior. We have some JavaScript documentation for general scripting and Integrify examples. You can also style your form's containers and individual questions using cascading style sheets. You can do this under the CSS tab. The last few items that I want to explain are the detail tab. So this is where you can edit the name of the form, you can change the category, and edit the description if necessary. You can also set the roles and permissions for the form, delete it, copy it, version it, export it, and you can also click on this questions button to view a list of each question and their client IDs. You can also export a CSV and JSON version of these questions if needed. Another thing you can do in this detail tab is save the form as a template. A form template is useful if you are creating many forms that will have the same questions every single time. So like for example, if every single form starts off with first and last name, date of request, department, stuff like that, you can create a form template, and I'll show you how to add it. So under the Form Builder tab, under Templates, you can load a template that you've created and add it right to the form. So that can be very useful when you're creating multiple forms that have the same questions every single time. Finally, under the References tab, some forms are used in many processes, and this Reference tab allows you to track down where the form is involved. So I can see that this PTO request form is in the PTO request process and this test process here. Now now you're able to understand the basics on building a new form. If you need any assistance or have any other questions building, you can always feel free to reach out to your customer success team.